Hey guys, Bobby here from the GM table, and we're talking about 5th edition again. Yeah, I know like a year ago I did my top 5 house rules for 5th edition, but first of all, some of that has changed with another year of the system under my belt. Also, those were just my top 5 favorite rules, not so much how I do everything in play. So today we're going to talk about the house rules I've been using after, God, what is it, like 5, 6 years of 5th edition? Anyways, the house rules I've been using at the table over my years of running the game and when I keep refining it down to the type of game I want to play. Now, before we go into the nitty gritty, I will note on top of the core books, there are 2 books I use really often. Should be no surprise of the first one, Xanathar's Guide. I have said this is a go-to. This should be the book you buy right after the player's handbook. You can get monster stats part of the free PDF online, and those will be plenty of monsters for you. I say get this before the monster manual. I definitely say get this well before the DMG, because this is going to give more useful rules than the GMG. Though, that's not knocking it. The DMG is still a good book. Go, buy it if you have the money. But if you're limited on funds, player's handbook plus this, plus the free PDFs is a much better value of how much game you're going to get for your buck. The second book I use is the Acquisitions Incorporated book. This, I already did a review of this, but if you haven't seen it, this is my go-to for if you're doing the Adventurers Own a company like an inn or a tavern, if they're part of a guild, or one of my favorite uses, if they become nobility and they have land they need to manage. This book, you can reskin a ton of it for that. So I use this book frequently for those kind of games, but that's really all I'm going to cover for this. Again, Xanathar's Guide's going to get an entire section dedicated to it. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with stuff in the player's handbook, and we're going to start with character generation. The very first house rule I use is actually a pretty standard rule. It's an organized play rule, but I want it known I do the PHB +1 rule, which means the players can make any kind of character they want using the player's handbook plus any one published Wizards of the Coast book. That means if they pick a race from Volo's Guide, they don't get to pick a subclass from Xanathar's Guide. The entire system has been written and balanced based off the PHB +1 rule. It's in the organized play rule. I just stick to it. It keeps things from getting too weird, but everybody has the freedom. You can pick whatever you want. But if you go off book on class, stay kind of on book on race. If you go off book on race, stay kind of on book on class. This doesn't count for spells. I'm just going to say that right out of the way. I allow spells from any of the published books. I also allow researching spells and all that. We're going to touch on that a little bit in my personal rules later on. On top of that, because I might as well bring it up right now, I don't allow classes from Unearthed Arcana, or I should say I very, very rarely allow them. It's been stated that these are playtest materials, and they're typically written more powerful in the playtest, and then they curve them back before publishing. Also, you have the issues of, while some of them get new names, a lot of stuff like in Xanathar's Guide are things based off playtests and Unearthed Arcana. And it's like, which one do you go with? All of that. There's only one exception. I'm going to touch on it right now. If one of my players wants to play Beastmaster Ranger, I allow the Revised Ranger. I only do it for the Beastmaster because the Hunter is plenty powerful as long as you remember to use all your abilities. And the Revised Ranger gets wonky when you try to make it fit with other subclasses from other books. But if you're a Beastmaster, I let you take Revised Ranger. That's my one Unearthed Arcana, because let's be honest, Beastmaster Ranger didn't work. As far as races, like I said, PHB +1 rule, but I do let my players know the rarer your race is, the more people are going to be cautious around you, the less people are going to trust you. I'll even let you play a monstrous race if you want that to be your +1 book. But I also warn them well ahead of time, if you pick a monstrous race, expect to be hated. Expect for this to basically be D&D hard mode. You play an orc, lots of town guards are told to shoot orcs on sight. You're no exception. Yes, if you work with them and you kind of go in disguise and eventually build up your reputation, maybe you're the one orc they eventually trust. But it ain't starting that way, and you gotta earn it. So you want to be something really weird? I let you, as long as you know the consequences. I'm very big about you can have all kinds of choices. Just understand there are consequences to your choices, and monstrous races are no different. Beyond the PHB +1 all, as far as classes go, typically I don't allow multi-classing in my game. And yes, ready for the pitchforks, but I've said this many times on the channel. Everyone forgets multi-classing is an optional rule. It does not have to be allowed. In fact, the assumption in the rules is that it isn't, but the assumption in the community is that it is. I don't tend to allow multi-classing. Now that said, full disclosure, there are 5th edition games I am paid to run for people. People want me to run my style of game, but if I'm being hired for a game, I work with my client to get the kind of game they want, and if they want a multi-classing type game, I will work around it, but that's their table I'm hired to run. That's not my table. With all that out of the way, it's time to start talking about what I use from Xanathar's Guide. Now, this is actually going to be 2 parts, not 2 videos, but 2 parts of this video. The stuff I use from Xanathar's Guide and the stuff I modify from Xanathar's Guide, because there's a couple things in here I take, but I tweak. But first and foremost, the tool proficiencies and the downtime activities from Xanathar's Guide are the reason I say this is Player's Handbook 2. It's not the extra class options. Those are nice and some people like them, but again, PHB +1 rule for my players. The tool proficiency rules were needed. The addition of more downtime activities are huge, and we're going to get into even a little bit more of how I handle that magic item creation rules in there, where you have to get one last item that has a CR guardian or something you have to take off of a CR creature, things like that. I incorporate that into my adventure design, and I can really flesh out the world, and my players can have a lot more things to do other than just the adventure I expect them to do. They can interact with the world a lot more with those 2 pieces of rules. There are also rules in the Xanathar's Guidebook I modify. The biggest rule in Xanathar's Guide that I use, but I've modified a little bit, is their XP rules. In the back of the book, they talk about how to do experience for organized play or community play. I just use that for my experience because it's a cross between the XP system and the milestone system. It's called XP, but for levels 1 to 4, 4 XP gets you a level, which means each point of XP is big. They're basically milestones. In fact, I like them better because you can track going up towards levels with still the big jumps of milestones. Beyond level 4, level 5 plus, it's 8 XP. Now, I do modify that rule a bit. First, I've actually taken a bit of the concepts from the D&D Essentials kit and how they handle XP. They actually did XP, instead of even calling it XP, there were cards that represent jobs on kind of a job board, and each card you finish is an XP. I've kind of taken that, I've tweaked it, I've modified it, and I've massaged with it. Now, while this isn't a hard and fast rule, from those I've created an outline of how I plot out XP for missions. A standard mission is worth 1 XP if it's equal to your tier. We're going to get into tier play in a second. A hard mission, or maybe like a boss mission, or the end of a chain of quests that have become a bigger storyline, is worth 2 XP. If you do a job that's for a tier lower than yours, so if you're between level 6 and 10 and you do a job for level 1 to 5, it's worth 1 less XP, which means those big jobs are still worth an XP. Those simple jobs are now so below you don't get XP, but you still get the reward, you still get the treasure, you still get any items you find, you still make the contacts. So sometimes it's worth doing those lower level jobs just for the rewards, but you're not getting XP for it. Now, if you are crazy enough to do jobs of a tier higher than yours, and yes, I'll throw out some jobs of higher tiers in the world. If a level 5 character wants to go and take a tier 4 job for like level 15 plus characters, they're gonna die, but it feels like the world isn't just leveling around them. Anyways, for every tier the job is above your current tier, it's 1 more XP. Yeah, it's not huge gains. It's not about gaining XP, but do also remember XP is very, very valuable. 1 XP gets exponentially more valuable compared to the standard XP system because it's always 1/8 of a level, level 5 and up. Below that, it's 1/4 of a level. It's even better.
Hey, this is Editing Bobby, interrupting my own video, but First of all, sorry if the dog's throwing aside. I want to say I got a ton more to say about this encounter design based on tiers of play and everything. In fact, I had so much more. It was basically another video in this video I had to cut out. So I think I'm going to do that as its own video. So keep an eye out for it if it was something that you're interested in.
Now, the other rules I modify for Xanathar's Guide are directly tied to this, because what I do is I use the encounter creation rules from Xanathar's Guide. I think they're way better than the monster manual. They're so much easier, so much more intuitive, but I do tweak what is considered deadly or hard. I do it based off the tier system. This does mean my games are harder. But before I get into it, I want to note something. Yes, there is a difficulty called deadly in all the encounter building stuff. But what 5th edition considers deadly is one player is likely to hit 0 HP once in the fight. For 5th edition, that is not deadly. That just happens. So I start at deadly, because that's when things start to actually be challenging enough to feel heroic. It's not that I never do non-deadly fights, but they're rarely part of quests. They're like random encounters and stuff like that. Since all of my jobs, you can call them quests, you can call them jobs. Since all of my jobs are tier-based, a medium encounter in a job is the middle section of a tier. So we'll do tier 2 because, again, tier 1's kind of weird. Tier 2, it goes from level 6 to level 10. A medium encounter is a deadly level 8 encounter by their encounter building rules. An easy encounter is a deadly level 6 encounter. A hard encounter or a boss or kind of like a big bad fight is a level 10. It spans the entire tier. This gives a lot of variety. Yes, it does make my fights bigger. It makes them deadlier, makes them harder, but I really don't get complaints about that. I do get known as being a killer GM, but I'm also not an antagonistic GM. I just don't pull punches. But that's how I use the tier system combined with the adventure system I kind of took from the tier system and the XP system and built it, and use that to modify the encounter system to make basically a rudimentary setup. Now, we're getting into the stuff that I have just done myself. There is no reference to this. The first one technically references Xanathar's Guide, but the changes have nothing to do with it. So, in Xanathar's Guide, there are rules for making magic items, and depending on the rarity of the item, has a CR creature that's either guarding the final ingredient you need, or you need to harvest something off of a creature of that CR, blah, blah, blah. There's no rolls to make, but you gotta go defeat this creature or defeat this guardian to get to this stuff. If my players want to make magic items, I use those rules. I don't change those. Though they're part of downtime, so I haven't listed them separately. The thing is if my players want to go make magic items, that's not a job they were hired to do, so it doesn't give them XP. And this, in a way, brings back it used to cost XP to make magic items and stuff. Instead of it going, you earn the XP and then you have to spend it on the item, it's the side quests to go get items. Special, not what's just found in stories, but if you're just trekking off, like, I really want that flame tongue sword, I'm gonna make it. You can do that. You can find the ingredients, you can quest off to get the thing you need to finish your flame tongue sword, but it's not a job, so it doesn't give XP. This actually hasn't really been an issue. I also allow my players to quest for specific items, not just ingredients of items. But specifically when they're questing for an item instead of making it, I take that CR chart for making items and I bump them up one rarity for finding the item wholesale. So they're harder to go get a finished item. I also use that in a modified, I'll probably do a whole video on this at some point, for if they want to research their own spells, and we do the like scroll rules combined with the magic item rules, and they can make up their own spells. As long as we can figure out the level of it, we now know you do this, go get it. On top of that, there is training rules. I allow those. I do think you need to go find trainers, and the higher your proficiency is when you go find the initial trainer, the more masterful of a trainer you need, because gaining proficiency at level 1 is a +2. Gaining proficiency at level 20 is a +5. I don't think the trainer that can train an epic hero is the same as a trainer that can train a novice hero. You're basically pushing them all the way to training that matches what they can do. So you got to find better trainers. Now, if you train early, you're good. But again, when you're training, if you go out and you quest for a master, it doesn't give you XP. That is your own personal quest. You go do it. Your reward is the proficiency. On top of that, I have added that you can train for feats. And I did this because there is a feat that gives you 3 languages for 1 feat. And there's some skill feats that do the same. It's 3 proficiencies is equal to a feat. This has been super helpful because basically what it means is if a player wants to go train for a feat, it will take 3 times as long as skill train, which is a lot of time. It's actually a fair amount of gold until you're mid to high level. And again, they will have to go quest. I tend to make trainers who can train you in a feat like masters of whatever they do, because feat's real powerful in 5th edition. But you can find them, you can go train out, and technically the whole party can go on this quest. And if you can convince the trainer to train everybody pays their gold amount for them all to get trained. And then we do downtime where you spend months with this crossbow expert so you can get the light crossbow mastery where you can fire hand crossbows with your offhand. Cool. We now have a story. It didn't give XP. Instead, everybody got a feat. And everybody who went will get the same feat. It's not like one master is going to go, you could take this one, you could take that. No, everybody's training the same thing. This also means sometimes players go, all right, we don't have any jobs right now, or we're getting to a point where like the big arc we took care of is done. We're all going to kind of go our separate ways and train and become better, and we'll come back together in a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how much training everybody wants to do. Sometimes maybe even just 6 months. But everybody's going to kind of go off their own way. And then we're going to regroup. Everyone's a little stronger, a little wiser. And we go back to our jobs. But again, the beautiful thing about those countdown timers and the quest system I built is if they go off and do that, there will be jobs that will go. And then no one will fix them. Sometimes, again, I might do an entire video about that quest system because there's a lot you can play with in it. But sometimes I do roles in secret to see if other heroes have come and handled it. Because if they're not, I don't like the idea that they're the only heroes doing any jobs anywhere. Because then why are their job boards? They weren't made specifically for this party. So I roll randomly to see if other heroes went and took care of the jobs. Frequently, people don't, but sometimes people do. And it's basically not taking a job as a gamble on whether or not someone else does it. And again, I'll actually probably do a whole video on that where you can do where if jobs aren't completed, you take that as inspiration to a sequel and you raise it up an entire tier, and maybe they're not ready to go face that tier, but the higher tier have longer countdown timers so they can build up to the tier and try and get there ahead of time because they feel responsible that things got as bad as it did because they ignored it. There's a lot you can do to make a dynamic world with that system. I've rambled on and on about encounters and XP and all that. We're going to bring it back to 2 fairly simple rules I use that aren't in any of the books. One, I know a good bit of people to use. And it's if a hero drops to 0 HP, they gain a level of exhaustion. Simple. It keeps the 0, pop back up, 0, pop back up problems going on. Because by the 3rd time you're down, you're getting disadvantage on saving throws. That includes death saves. By the 6th time they go down, there's no bring them back up. They died. Because 6th level of exhaustion, you die. And exhaustion only heals 1 level per day. It adds a large sense of danger to the game. Also, as I said, my encounters tend to be really, really tough. I don't anticipate 10 encounters in one day. Players aren't going to do that. They're going to back off. They're going to go and rest. So make the encounters bigger and tougher. And if they drop down 2 times in the same fight, all of a sudden they got to rest 2 days to fully recover from that fight. The world can stretch out. Consequences can last. Now, I also, at times, this isn't something I use all the time, but I'm going to mention it here. I do have honorable mentions at the end. But I'm going to mention this one here. I do sometimes use lingering injuries. I do it very rarely. A lot of my players hate it because I've had the bowman lose an arm, and they're like, well, I can't do that. I'm just going to retire the character rather than playing with it. I prefer players that take those hindrances and go with it. The lingering injury rules, if you drop to 0, you take a lingering injury. I do get that. It makes 0 matter, but 0 down and up happens so much late game, exhaustion handles it. And if you do a crit, you get a lingering injury. I just combine those. If you get dropped to 0 by a crit, you get a lingering injury. It makes it happen rare, but when it happens, it is a big deal. I have one more completely custom rule before our honorable mentions. It's how I handle flanking. First of all, I don't do the whole line on the board and positioning. Second of all, I want to note, because again, one of those assumptions like multiclassing, flanking isn't a core rule. It's an optional rule, and not every group has to use flanking. I've had so many groups who want to flank, I eventually made my own version, because not all my encounters use maps, and flanking only really works on maps. And yeah, you could be like, oh, we're both on him, so we flank in Theater of the Mind. But then it's pack tactics, where it doesn't matter as long as you're up with them, always get advantage. I've actually figured out a way that I love. It's based on multi-attack, and some enemies who also get an attack as a bonus action. However many attacks an enemy can make in an action, so multi-attack plus bonus action attacks. That's how many enemies can be on them before there's a flanking bonus. So if they can make 2 attacks, you need 3 guys on them before you start getting flanking, because that's when they start getting overwhelmed. If a bear can make 3 attacks, he should be able to defend himself against 3 enemies. He can attack all 3 of them on his turn. He should be able to defend against all 3 of them, somewhat standard on not his turn. This doesn't count things like breath weapons or spells, anything that has limited use or is on a recharge. Those don't count. This is just what they could do every round standard. So basically multi-attack, and some things like the Bandit Captain, I believe, can make an extra attack as a bonus action, stuff like that. That does count towards it. You add it all together, that's how many people can be on them before it's flanking. It also makes pack tactics really matter, because things with pack tactics ignore that. As long as there's somebody with them, pack tactics kicks in, they get advantage, done. All right, my battery's dying, so I'm going to try and be quick of this last. I want 2 honorable mentions. The first, again, if you saw my video from last year, I love the gritty realism rest variant. But as I've modified my world and shifted for it, if I go for a specifically gritty, slow game, it still works great. I love it. I still love that rule. But there's like 4 pages of house rules I need to make to tweak some of the classes so they don't get hit in their class abilities to make the rule work. Barbarians get screwed by that rule. So honestly, I've kind of shelved it. I still love that rule. I love what it can do with a single change of the system. But I think I've shifted where, unless I'm specifically going for that kind of game, if I'm going for high adventure, high action games, I don't use it. The other rule is one I use every time I'm playing online on like Fantasy Grounds, actually specifically on Fantasy Grounds, and that's the System Shock rules. The System Shock rules are from the DMG. If you take at least half your max damage in one hit, there's a table you roll on. It typically has a save, or something happens. It can be knocked unconscious, can be you can't take reactions, stuff like that. I love this rule. I love the massive damage rules. I'll actually add the massive damage knockout rules in with this. Here's the thing. At the table, I'm not going to go, oh, wait, what percentage of your health was that attack? Does it qualify? Does it not? With System Shock, all right, now I got to roll on a table. Oh, that table needs a save. Let's roll a save. No, I ignore all of it. But on Fantasy Grounds, it's all automated. So it happens like that. When that can happen, I use it. I use it every time because I love the concepts of the rules. But at the table, when I'm having to manage all of it, it just slows the game down way too much. Anyways, those were my house rules. That's what I've been doing with 5th edition. Comment below the house rules you've been doing, what you love, what you hate, all of that stuff. I'll catch you guys next week. Bye.